Hey Burns, how are you today?
Doing okay, Dick.
You know, I'd like to start off because I read a couple of things that really got me. First of all, there's one fact that I think is really important, and that is I read somewhere that one of the anti-vaxxers is really, really upset with the COVID vaccinations because everybody that got the smallpox vaccination in the 19th century is dead. And I think that's important. I was not aware of that.
Uh, that's incredible. They're all gone.
Yep, they're all gone.
Everyone who didn't get vaccinated or who got vaccinated in the 1800s is gone.
Yeah, they're all dead.
Ah, geez.
Yeah, so it kind of makes me relook the vaccine. And
Thank God
I
for
think it's
information,
important.
huh?
Yeah. Now, the other thing that I was thinking about, and I read something, it may have been on Japanese TV because that's about all I ever watch, and that is that what's more important than 9/11 is actually 9/12. The way the whole country, American flags were sold out. I mean, yeah, people were more patriotic than they've been for God knows how long. And then all of a sudden, 20 years later, it's kind of like, oh well, what the hell? And I find that really kind of hard to believe. It's almost like it's become kind of another Labor Day holiday. Rather than celebrate it for what it is, let's just get another day off from work, which causes problems if you're on unemployment. Because I don't know, but if there's a national holiday, do you still get paid unemployment for that day?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think that's important.
I presume you do, but I'm not an expert on unemployment.
Okay, so my question comes to mind. In the last 20 years, what the hell has happened?
Well, a couple comments in that regard. I don't think as a nation we ever took the obvious lessons of 9/11 to heart. And to your point, as a nation, we never maintained the spirit of patriotism and for that brief moment, whether it was a matter of days or weeks or months, the lack of terrible divisiveness that we see today. I mean, it's hard to say today that the country's patriotic, and certainly nothing akin to what we saw in the aftermath of 9/11. Like you, I remember the flags and the church bells and the outpouring of good old-fashioned American patriotism. The country seemed really united, and we're anything but today. So
Yeah, well, one of the things that concerns me, and I was thinking about it, uh, what happened is the immigrants went after the immigrants. Like my next door neighbor is Pakistani, and people still won't talk to him because they figure the Pakistanis are still responsible for all this. And now you've got the anti-Asian hate thing going on. And then I'm beginning to wonder, was it really patriotism or was it kind of a reaction like after Pearl Harbor, where if you're Japanese, you're obviously the enemy? It's almost like after 9/11, if you're Arab, you're definitely the enemy. Uh,
well,
that was never the intent.
I never saw it that way, and I'm familiar with the history. As an example, during World War II, the Japanese internment camps. I worked with a Japanese lady who, as a child, she and her family were put in internment camps. I'm also aware because I'm of both Irish and German ancestry. I had German grandparents on my maternal side, and there was a great deal of prejudice during World War II, some of which has been portrayed in movies. But I don't know that there was that type of hostility, if that's the word, towards Arabs. If anything, I thought we were, we didn't take the threat seriously enough. I remember, because those were the days I was flying a lot in terms of my job, and that's when the government was preaching that there's no racial profiling. So if you're sitting in an airport, say in Detroit, ready to board, and you saw people that seemed to be of Middle Eastern descent, and so in the context of the times, you couldn't help but check them out, and people were they were paranoid. Do I want to board a plane with, as an example, those two characters going in? I mean, you were literally scolded by both the press and the government for thinking that way. So I thought the pendulum had swung entirely the other way from the things that occurred during World War II. So, but I believe we've lost the light. Ironically, with tomorrow being the 20-year anniversary of 9/11, tomorrow the Taliban government, the newly formed government in Afghanistan, is going to celebrate the founding of the latest iteration of what passes for government in Afghanistan. And a handful of those leaders are the ones Obama let loose from Guantanamo in exchange for Bergdahl. And I think, Dick, you probably remember, as I do, when Bergdahl was entertained on the White House lawn with his wife by Obama. And he was a deserter. And now those people that we were told would be innocuous have participated in the formation of the new Taliban government. So I sometimes think that the only thing we got out of the 9/11 experience was thousands of new union workers manning the airports and making it, an invasion of our personal privacy to board an aircraft.
Am I supposed to respond?
Yeah, if you want to, or you can go and take off in another vein.
Well, I really can't respond because I don't really understand. So,
I mean, I've seen some of the, not of late because I'm retired and I haven't flown in quite a while, but as I said, I used to, for 3.5 decades, did a hell of a lot of flying on business. And since 9/11, some of the body searches and taking off your shoes and your belts, and particularly some of the things that female passengers have had to go through, all in the interest of security. And they've had any number of studies where people have been able to get past those X-ray machines and security details and, board with weapons. So who knows? I said that somewhat, I guess, sardonically. But I think as a general statement, I don't feel we're any safer as a nation 20 years after 9/11 than we were the day before 9/11. And a lot of people are saying that with what's happened in Afghanistan and the billions of dollars of armaments left behind for the Taliban, that there's likely to be, and also the Biden administration letting in thousands of unvetted Afghans, as well as the southern border being wide open and people crossing at will. No one being vetted there, not even for COVID. There'll undoubtedly be terrorist attacks on the country. It may not be of the scale of 9/11, but I think that'll happen, unfortunately.
Well, I hate to agree with you. I do agree that I don't feel any safer, number one. I hope nothing happens tomorrow, but I don't know. And as far as Afghanistan, shit, they've been in the 15th century, they're gonna stay in the 15th century.
Well, they may stay in the 15th century, but they have 21st century weaponry now.
Yeah,
And I'd like to know who in the hell trained them to fly Black Hawk helicopters?
we did.
Thank you. I mean, you would have insights into that given your military career, but I just, as just an average citizen, I find it interesting that all this military equipment is left behind, and all of a sudden these goat herders seem to know how to use it.
Well, what's interesting to me is the Biden administration says the stuff was demilitarized. Well, I don't know. There seems to be a lot of it that wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know what demilitarized means. I mean, you'd like to think it means it's impossible to, drive a Humvee or fly a helicopter, but nobody's defined that term for me. Maybe they just pulled the keys out of the ignition. I don't know.
Well, basically, it means that it's rendered such that its initial or its intended mission cannot be used. So in other words, a helicopter can't fly. In theory, a Humvee can't run and carry anything. But then you look at all the weapons and stuff. I mean, aside from taking a firing pin out, which can always be replaced, it's kind of ridiculous.
Well, to your point of being a firing pin being replaced, I mean, I've got to believe that Russia and China will be vying for some form of control, and both countries are sophisticated enough that they can make that stuff work, and they'll be hauling some of it back to study it and replicate it. So I think it was in terms of the, our country's treasure defined as taxpayer money, that it was a huge boondoggle and nothing good came of it after 20 years.
Well, it did help a lot of contractors, as it did in Vietnam, and as it actually did in World Wars I and II. War is a great moneymaker.
Well, it's interesting. I can picture him vividly, and I can't think of his name. But he hasn't come to trial yet. The guy who, and I'm not talking about Osama bin Laden, but
Yeah, you're talking about one of the last of the 20 people at Guantanamo.
yeah, I'm talking, yeah, who supposedly was the architect of the 9/11 attack.
Yeah, and now he's head of security in the new Afghanistan because he's another one that we let out.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you go. You're probably making my point better than I made it. But it's amazing that we had, the second Pearl Harbor, if that's a apt analogy. And unlike our country's response to Pearl Harbor, where in the space of about 6 months, we went on the offensive in the Pacific. 20 years after 9/11, we accomplished not a thing in Afghanistan. And as you just said, and I just said, do we feel any safer? No. And the other thing I would add to it, maybe it's not quite germane to what we're talking about today, but if you look at crime in our cities under the Democratic regime and homicide rates, I mean, just call it domestic terrorism, which it is. We're in far worse shape today than we were 20 years ago. So I can't make a case that our government, whether Republican or Democrat controlled, responded to the surprise attack of 9/11, and that we're, a much safer country today. We're not safer, and we're not as patriotic, to your earlier point.
But why is that? What happened? And in fact, hitchhiking on what you just said, it seemed to work after World War II, with the exception maybe of internment. But what happened in the last 20 years here?
Oh, you always ask me that question, and I maybe always have the same answer, whatever the context you ask the question in. I think the media, we've lost journalism in this country, and the mainstream media has allied with the Democratic Party, which is synonymous with liberalism. And I think the university complex in this country is teaching a different brand of Americanism that is more akin to Marxist socialism than it is to the principles of the American founding and our democratic republic. So I think those two things have been ongoing irrespective of 9/11. And maybe what we saw in 9/12, while it happened pretty much in all corners of the country, I would characterize as more of a something akin to a middle America response to a dastardly attack. But meanwhile, back at the ranch, these other things were gaining momentum in the country and have continued, really unabated, unchecked, with little in the way of a countervailing influence. We're churning out people who think differently than Americans of old.
That's interesting, and I don't remember where I read it, but I read something in the last couple of weeks, and it was talking about Socrates, where he taught people how to think as opposed to what to think. And, that brings us back to what we've said about Claremont many times, at least in my experience, because I learned how to think, but they didn't really twist me around and tell me what to think.
Yeah, it's critical thinking, which you've brought up a number of times in our podcast. And I'll just, and this won't come unexpectedly. In terms of Biden voters, and we're not even sure to this day how many there really were, but how can anybody make an argument that they thought critically in casting their vote for somebody who clearly is addled and for the first time in American history ran a presidential campaign from the basement of their home? And currently as president, in his first year in the presidency, will run away from the press and will conclude speeches to the nation as well as, briefings to the nation by saying at the podium, well, I'm supposed to leave now and not take questions. It's
Well,
that I'm veering off our subject, I suppose.
well, no, you're not, because the question I asked you earlier off the air is, who's really at fault? Is it the party that puts up with this stuff and pushes it forward? Or is it just that the American people somehow have lost their smarts and are willing to put up with it?
I think it's a combination of the two, but there's still enough, and I'm not praising this as a virtue in the context of the Biden administration. I think there's still enough of a civility in this country that people don't want to blame voters as much as they're going to blame an administration. But I think, given what was clearly known about Biden, 50 years in Washington, no significant legislative achievements, known throughout his career as a moderate, but clearly in getting the nomination and in the manner in which he did not campaign, that he was a captive of the left, and particularly in naming Harris as running mate, who didn't get a single vote in the Democratic primaries and who lambasted Biden before she became his running mate. Something was not right. That wasn't a pun. And yet they voted for him. And I think, voters who put somebody like that in office, somebody who's basically incoherent, unless they're reading from a teleprompter, and even reading from a teleprompter, trips over his tongue. Somebody, and I mentioned this in a recent podcast, who the Secret Service has to point to the sidewalk entering the West Wing offices, and he still veers off onto the lawn and then into a hedge. I mean, honest to God. And people voted for this guy? I think they need to be held accountable. Now, what do I mean by held accountable? I'm not saying they ought to be, locked up or ostracized by society. But I think to this day, whether you're a Republican or as I am a conservative and independent, tend to shy away from taking on liberals because we tend to be more polite and civil. And meanwhile, back at the ranch, Larry Elder, who is running against Gavin Newsom in the recall election in California, is being pelted with eggs. And the police don't respond, and it's not termed a hate crime. Polite society doesn't want to deal with the rabid left, but the rabid left is everywhere. And there's not a day goes by, Dick, that you don't read about some college professor, university professor who says something totally preposterous. By the way, did you know that according to a congresswoman from New York, and I know you'll guess who this is, you and I are able to menstruate. I didn't know that. I don't remember in my dormitory restroom when you and I were in college that, we had female products in vending machines for the guys, and we attended an all men's college. But if you were to accept the liberal mantra of today, we should have had tampon dispensers in our dormitories.
Well, that I missed. I did not see it. I guess it's just one more thing to worry about.
Yeah. Well, it was AOC who, anything that comes out of her mouth is beyond the pale. But she now doesn't say, a woman gives birth, it's a birthing person. So once again, the new lexicon that the liberals provide. I'm getting a little afield from our topic today, but you did ask what's changed. And I think the nation on 9/12, I felt it was galvanized. And today, I think it's in many respects crumbling under the weight of Marxism.
Yeah, I'm I'm not sure how to respond because my next question would always be, well, how do we fix it? But I wanted to go back to something you said about voters. And I think part of the problem with voters, whether they be intelligent or not, or informed or not, I honestly think Biden's election was more about people who voted against Trump. And we're not really sure how many there were, than the fact that they really liked him. I think Trump turned off so many people that that's just the way it went. Now, with the exception of his base, which regardless of what Trump does, they love him. So, who knows?
The thing to that remark, and this isn't just something I've noticed in less informed individuals, but I've seen this in keenly intelligent people, which is even more worrisome. But the people who just cannot stand Donald Trump, they don't talk about they disagree with this policy or that policy. It's always about his personal shortcomings, his tweets, which, by the way, aggravated me too. his egotism, or the popular word today, narcissism. But they don't talk about how he controlled the southern border, how he improved our economy, how he reduced taxes, how he began rebuilding the military, and so forth and so on. They don't get into credible conversations in which they take a different point of view than somebody on the right. And you know, I'm reading a book now on one of our esteemed college professors from our day at college we attended, Harry Jaffa, and his first seminal work on Lincoln was built around the Lincoln-Douglas debates. And I've often referred in a more modern context to the Kennedy-Nixon debates. In both cases, civil debates, well thought, positions well articulated, and trusting voters to then make a decision. And we don't have that today. And, you know, we have, not only does the media report in sound bites, but the candidates have learned how to.
Hold on, we have to cease this because I keep on getting a call. So we'll finish this up next week. How's that?
Ooh, that was abrupt. Okay.
Yeah.